church was quiet except for the low hum of the organ and the occasional cough echoing through the pews. I sat there, my black dress heavy on my shoulders, my hands twisting the funeral program over and over in my lap. It was my father's funeral, and every second felt unreal. The smell of lilies filled the air, thick and suffocating, mixing with the sharp tang of polished wood. People whispered, some wiping their eyes, others staring at the coffin as if expecting my father to sit up and start giving orders again, just like he used to. My name is Rebecca Hayes. I am 37 years old, and today I buried the only parent who ever truly mattered to me. My father wasn't perfect, but he had been my anchor, my mentor, the one who told me I could become something even when the world doubted me. Losing him felt like losing my foundation. I should have been allowed to grieve in peace. But peace was the last thing my family ever gave me, because sitting only 2 rows ahead, dressed in a designer black suit, was Michael, my stepbrother. His posture screamed arrogance, as though this funeral was just another business meeting he was forced to attend. He barely glanced at the coffin, too busy whispering into his phone, probably telling some poor assistant how soon he'd be taking over the estate. Michael always acted like he was entitled to everything, simply because he was my father's second wife's son. He had lived his life believing the world owed him something, and sadly, my father's money had often made him think that was true. I could feel eyes on me from the relatives who had traveled miles to be here. They all knew the history, at how Michael had always been treated like the golden child, while I, the biological daughter, had been expected to work twice as hard for half the recognition. My mother had passed away when I was only 10, and my father remarried a year later. From that moment, I became the outsider in my own home. Michael was pampered, shielded from consequences, given every opportunity, while I was expected to carry myself with quiet strength. It had been that way for 27 years. As the pastor spoke about forgiveness and family unity, I stared at the polished wood of the coffin and thought about the last conversation I'd had with my father. He'd been so weak then, his voice barely a whisper, but his eyes still sharp. "Rebecca," he had said, "I want you to trust me. When the time comes, you'll understand." At the time, I didn't know what he meant. But sitting there in that pew, watching Michael smirk as though the world already belonged to him, I felt a chill. My father had left something unsaid, and Michael was convinced it was all his. The service ended, and people rose slowly, some crying, others already making their way to the luncheon prepared in the church hall. I stood still for a moment, unable to move, watching as Michael shook hands like a politician, thanking people for coming as though it were his day. He had the nerve to put a hand on my shoulder as I passed him. "Don't worry, Rebecca," he murmured low enough for only me to hear. "I'll take good care of everything from here on out." His words hit like ice water. Everything? He hadn't even waited for the will to be read. He was already claiming my father's legacy as his own. My grief began to twist into something sharper. Anger, fear, and a quiet determination rising in my chest. I didn't know what was in that will, but I knew one thing. Michael's smug confidence was about to be tested. And for once, I hoped the universe was on my side. The luncheon felt more like a boardroom negotiation than a gathering to honor my father. Round tables were lined with plates of untouched food, and the air buzzed with polite conversations that masked the real tension simmering beneath. Everyone was waiting for one thing: the reading of the will. It hung over us like a storm cloud, and Michael's smug demeanor only made the anticipation worse. I sat near the back of the room with a glass of water I had barely touched. My father's lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, was already present. A thin, sharp-eyed man in his late 60s, he had been my father's confidant for decades. His briefcase rested neatly by his chair, and every so often his hand would brush against it, as though reminding himself of the weight it carried. That leather case didn't just hold papers. It held the truth my father had left behind. Michael, of course, couldn't help himself. He circled the room like a vulture, shaking hands, flashing smiles, and whispering promises of continuity to anyone who would listen. You'd think he was the one being mourned, not my father. I watched him stop by one of our cousins, leaning in close. "Don't worry," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Dad knew I was the one capable of handling the estate. Rebecca's, well, she's better off with something smaller. He wanted her comfortable, not burdened. The way he said it, as if I were some fragile child instead of a grown woman, sent heat crawling up my neck. I clenched my hands in my lap, willing myself to stay silent. This wasn't the time to lash out. My father's words echoed in my mind. "Trust me. When the time comes, you'll understand." I had to believe he had seen this arrogance in Michael too, and that he had prepared for it. Finally, Mr. Whitaker stood. The conversations died instantly, and all eyes turned toward him. He cleared his throat, his voice carrying the gravity of the moment. "As executor of Mr. Hayes's estate, I have been entrusted with his final wishes. We will now proceed with the reading of the will." Chairs scraped against the floor as people shifted closer. Michael positioned himself right up front, his jaw set, his body practically vibrating with anticipation. I remained where I was, my spine straight, refusing to let him see any flicker of weakness. Whatever my father had written, I would hear it with dignity. Mr. Whitaker opened the briefcase slowly, deliberately, pulling out a thick envelope sealed with my father's handwriting. My breath caught. That familiar script, strong, deliberate letters I'd seen on birthday cards and notes of encouragement, was like hearing his voice again. For a moment, grief washed over me, raw and sharp. Then the lawyer broke the seal, and the sound snapped me back into the room. Michael leaned forward, his lips curling into a smile. He was so certain that everything was already his. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him not to celebrate too soon. But I stayed silent, my eyes fixed on Mr. Whitaker. "In the matter of my estate," the lawyer began, "I leave specific instructions regarding both personal and financial assets." His tone was neutral, but I noticed his eyes flicker toward me briefly before returning to the page. That single glance sent a shiver through me. Something was coming. Michael stretched an arm across the back of his chair like he was already king of the castle, his confidence filling the room. My heart pounded as Mr. Whitaker continued. The weight of the moment pressed against my chest. I could feel everyone holding their breath, waiting to hear who would inherit the empire my father had built. And in that suspended silence, I thought of his final words again. "Trust me." Mr. Whitaker's voice carried easily through the hushed room. Every word felt like a hammer striking against Michael's fragile mask of certainty. "To my children," he began, "I want to speak plainly. You have each shaped my life in ways words can hardly describe. Michael, my stepson, you brought energy into this family when you were young. Rebecca, my daughter, you brought me purpose and hope when I needed it most." Michael puffed up at the mention of his name, shooting me a smug glance. I didn't return it. I kept my focus steady on Mr. Whitaker, my nails pressing into the soft fabric of my dress. My father's words were measured, deliberate. He had known exactly what kind of storm they would unleash. The lawyer turned the page. "To Michael," he continued, "I leave certain accounts and investments to ensure your continued security. These are not insignificant, and they should provide you stability." A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. Michael's smirk widened. He leaned back as though victory had already been declared. But then Mr. Whitaker paused. His expression changed, just slightly, as he prepared to read the next line. The silence grew thick, the kind of silence that makes your heart beat louder in your ears. "And to my daughter Rebecca," he said, "I leave Hayes Manor, along with the controlling interest in Hayes Enterprises." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, the scrape of chairs. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I thought I must have misheard him. Hayes Manor, the home my father had poured his soul into, and the company that bore his name? He had left it all to me? Michael shot out of his chair, his face flushed crimson. "What?" His voice cracked through the room. "This is ridiculous. There must be some mistake." He spun toward Mr. Whitaker, jabbing a finger at the papers. "Read that again. You're misinterpreting." The lawyer's gaze was steady, almost cold. "There is no mistake. These were your father's explicit instructions, signed and notarized. The estate is clear." I sat frozen, a dozen emotions battling inside me. Grief, disbelief, vindication, and a strange calm that settled like a cloak over my shoulders. My father had kept his promise. He had seen me, trusted me, even when the rest of the family treated me as invisible. Michael's voice rose, desperate now. "She can't run a company. She doesn't know the first thing about business. I've been by Dad's side for years. He relied on me." His words cracked, half plea, half rage. I finally lifted my eyes to him, meeting his furious glare. My voice came out steady, firmer than I expected. "If Dad believed you were capable, Michael, he would have left it to you. But he didn't. That speaks louder than anything you can say." The murmurs in the crowd swelled, shifting like a tide. I could feel the weight of their judgment moving away from me and toward him. For years he had played the golden child, but now the truth was written in black ink, undeniable. Michael slammed his fist on the table. "This isn't over. I'll contest it. I'll drag this through court until she gives up." His threats rang hollow, even to his own ears. Because no matter what storm he tried to stir, the will was ironclad. My father had planned for this moment, and Michael knew it. I sat taller, no longer hiding in the shadows. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing exactly where I was meant to be. My father's legacy wasn't slipping into greedy hands. It was mine to protect. And as I glanced at Michael's face twisted with fury, I realized something else. This battle had only just begun. Michael's chair screeched against the polished wood floor as he stormed closer to the lawyer's table. His hands trembled, not from grief, but from fury. "No, this isn't happening. He promised me. He said I'd inherit everything. I took care of him when she was off living her own life." His voice cracked, high and desperate, and it echoed through the chapel like a child's tantrum rather than a man's authority. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their whispers buzzing like bees. Some avoided his eyes while others leaned forward, eager for more spectacle. I remained still, my father's words replaying in my mind. He hadn't left me scraps. He had given me everything, the house, the company, the legacy. And in that moment I realized this was not only about inheritance. This was about trust, about who my father had believed in when it mattered most. "Sit down, Michael," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the noise. It wasn't loud, but it carried. He spun toward me, his eyes wild. "You think you've won? You don't even know what's ahead of you. That company will eat you alive. You'll beg me to take it back." His words were venom, but I saw the fear underneath. He was scrambling, losing the control he'd always flaunted, and it terrified him. Mr. Whitaker remained calm, shuffling the documents with steady hands. "Your father anticipated disputes," he said firmly. "That's why he was meticulous. Every asset, every clause is written here. There will be no contest, Michael. The will stands." For a long moment, silence pressed down on the room. My heart thudded in my chest, but I didn't falter. I felt my father's presence steady and unwavering, as if he'd prepared me for this exact moment. I thought of the nights he had quietly encouraged me when no one else believed in me. His lessons about integrity, responsibility, and resilience. This was his final lesson, and his final gift. Michael finally dropped back into his chair, his chest heaving. His confidence was cracked wide open for all to see. No longer the charming stepbrother who always had the upper hand, but a man exposed, his entitlement stripped bare. I almost pitied him. Almost. The rest of the will was read in silence. Smaller bequests, family heirlooms, savings accounts, donations to charity. But the heart of it had already been spoken. When Mr. Whitaker closed the folder with a final snap, the reality settled over the room like a heavy curtain. My father's voice was gone, but his decision echoed louder than any of Michael's protests. People began to leave in hushed clusters, some offering me sympathetic smiles, others nodding with approval. Michael sat rigid, staring at nothing, his pride shattered. I stood, smoothing the skirt of my dress, and walked toward the front where the casket lay draped in flowers. My fingers brushed the polished wood. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered, my throat tight but steady. "I'll make you proud." Behind me, I heard Michael mutter, low and bitter, "This isn't the end." His words floated like smoke, meant to unsettle. But as I turned and looked him straight in the eye, I saw it clearly. The fight in him wasn't strength anymore. It was desperation. And desperation is a dangerous thing. The funeral ended, but the tension didn't. By the time I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, I could feel eyes following me. Some were sympathetic, others curious, but one pair burned with resentment. Michael's. He stood near the entrance, his jaw tight, his fists stuffed deep into his pockets. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. He smirked. Not the confident kind of smirk he used to wear, but a hollow one, like a mask barely holding together. "Enjoy it while it lasts," he said when I walked past him. His tone was low, almost casual, but I knew better. It wasn't a statement, it was a warning. I kept walking, refusing to let him see the tremor in my hands. But inside, I knew this wasn't over. In Michael's world, nothing ever ended quietly. That evening, after the last of the guests had gone and the house finally fell silent, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my father's study. The room smelled faintly of his cologne, books lined every wall, and the leather chair creaked under my weight. On the desk lay the keys to the company office, the very thing Michael thought belonged to him. I traced the cold metal with my fingers and felt a mix of pride and dread. My father's trust was a gift, but it was also a challenge. I wasn't just inheriting property. I was inheriting a battle. The phone rang, breaking the quiet. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Silence. Then a voice, sharp and familiar. "Rebecca, this isn't fair. You don't deserve it. You'll ruin everything Dad built." Michael. His words came in short bursts, each one dripping with bitterness. "Michael, it's over. Dad made his choice," I said, keeping my voice calm. "No. You think this is finished, but I'll fight. I'll find a way to take it from you. The board knows me. The employees know me. You're nothing but a shadow trying to fill shoes too big for you." I hung up before he could finish. My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. Instead, I opened my father's desk drawer. Inside were files, notes, and letters, detailed instructions, plans for the company's future, even personal letters addressed to me. He hadn't left me blind. He'd prepared me. And the more I read, the more I realized something. My father had known this storm was coming. He'd trusted me to weather it. The next morning, I walked into the company headquarters. Every step through the glass doors felt heavy, but determined. Employees glanced up, whispering, some with curiosity, others with cautious respect. At the far end of the lobby stood Michael, already working the crowd. He shook hands, cracked jokes, smiled like the heir apparent he believed himself to be. When he saw me, his smile faltered. Just slightly, but enough. I walked past him without breaking stride, climbed the stairs, and entered the boardroom. The directors were already seated. Papers shuffled, eyes flickered between me and Michael. I placed the folder my father had left on the table. "This is his plan," I said firmly, "and this is my responsibility now. I don't intend to argue about what he wanted. It's all here." Michael scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "They won't follow you. You're not cut out for this." I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Maybe not in your eyes, but in Dad's?" I was always the one he trusted. The room fell silent. For the first time, Michael didn't have a quick retort. He drummed his fingers on the table, his mask of control slipping piece by piece. And as I stood there, I realized something powerful. This wasn't just about the will anymore. It was about proving him wrong, proving my father right, and proving to myself that I was stronger than Michael ever imagined. The war had begun, and I was ready. The next few weeks felt like walking through a battlefield where every handshake was a test and every conversation carried hidden blades. Michael didn't waste time making his move. Within days of the will reading, whispers began circulating through the company hallways. I'd hear fragments as I passed. "She's inexperienced, doesn't understand the business, just riding her father's legacy." It didn't take much to guess who planted the seeds. One morning, I walked into the boardroom to find Michael already there, leaning casually against the table, his voice low but loud enough to carry. "Rebecca's a sweet girl," he was saying, "but can she really handle million-dollar contracts? Our clients expect leadership, not learning curves." Laughter rippled among two of the directors, but it stopped when they saw me enter. I set my father's folder on the table with deliberate care. "If you have concerns, Michael," I said, my tone calm but sharp enough to cut through the room, "bring them to me directly. Otherwise, let's not waste time with gossip." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just looking out for the company, Rebecca. Nothing personal." But it was personal. Everything about it was personal. Later that afternoon, I received an email from one of our largest clients, a vague note about reevaluating their contract. My stomach dropped. I checked the records. The last correspondence had been steady, positive. Something had changed. By the end of the day, I found out why. Michael had taken it upon himself to reassure them about the transition. His words had painted me as a temporary figurehead until the company found real leadership. That night, sitting in my father's study, I felt the weight pressing down. For years, I'd been the quiet one in the family, the one who worked hard in the shadows while Michael shined in public. Now, he was using every ounce of that polish against me. But I also remembered my father's handwriting on the last letter he left me. "Strength isn't about avoiding storms, Rebecca. It's about learning to stand in the rain until others see you won't fall." The next morning, I walked into the office earlier than anyone else. I reviewed every pending contract, every open account, every employee performance report. If Michael thought I would crumble, he was wrong. I wasn't here to survive. I was here to lead. When the board convened again that week, Michael tried to corner me. He came armed with charts and flashy presentations, painting himself as the savior who could stabilize the company. I let him speak. I let him preen. And when he finished, I quietly pulled out the notes I'd compiled. Real numbers, actual projections, strategies rooted in the very research my father had left me. Leadership isn't about talking louder, I said, sliding the papers across the table. It's about results. These are the results my father trusted me to continue, and I intend to deliver them. For a moment, the room was silent. Then one of the senior directors, a man who had worked with my father for 20 years, cleared his throat. "I see no reason to doubt her," he said firmly. Others nodded. Michael's face tightened, but he covered it quickly with a thin smile. "Impressive. But let's see how long you can keep it up." The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown at my feet. That evening, as I left the building, I saw Michael waiting by the parking lot. His expression was darker than I'd ever seen. He stepped forward, his voice low, almost a growl. "You think you've won? You have no idea what I'm capable of, Rebecca. This isn't over. It's just beginning." I unlocked my car without flinching, though my heart pounded in my chest. As I slid into the driver's seat, I glanced at him through the window. "You're right," I said. "It is just beginning, but not the way you think." For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in his eyes. Michael wasn't just trying to undermine me, he was preparing for war. And I realized so was I. Michael's words stayed with me like an echo that refused to fade. "This isn't over." I knew he meant it. And in the days that followed, his actions proved louder than the threat itself. First came the sudden delays in paperwork. Contracts that should have been on my desk never arrived. When I asked the department heads, they claimed they'd already sent everything. Then I discovered Michael had intercepted emails, rerouted calls, and even told staff that all decisions still had to go through him. It was subtle sabotage, nothing I could call him out on directly without looking paranoid. But I wasn't imagining it. My father's company was being chipped away from the inside. Then came the whisper campaign. Employees who had always been polite started keeping their distance. Coffee room conversations would stop when I walked in. I even overheard someone say, "She's just a placeholder, Michael's the real leader." The poison was spreading, and I knew exactly who was pouring it. At night, when the office was quiet, I'd sit in my father's chair and remind myself why I was here. I thought about his steady hands guiding mine when he taught me how to read financial ledgers as a teenager. I thought about his faith when he wrote that will, choosing me over Michael, and I promised myself I wouldn't let fear decide my next move. Still, I couldn't ignore the pressure building. Michael wasn't satisfied with undermining me. He was preparing to destroy me. I found proof one late evening when I opened a file left on my desk. Inside was a copy of my personal bank statements, documents no one should have access to. A sticky note rested on top with just 2 words scrawled in Michael's handwriting. "Nice savings." My chest went cold. This wasn't just professional anymore. He was prying into my private life, warning me he could use anything against me. The next morning, I confronted him in the hallway. "Stay out of my accounts," I said firmly. He leaned in close, smirking, his voice a whisper only I could hear. "Then stay out of my company." For the first time, I realized what I was up against wasn't simply rivalry. It was war without rules, but even wars could be won with allies. That evening, I called a private meeting with the most trusted directors. I laid everything on the table, the missing documents, the client's sabotage, even the note left on my desk. Their reactions were a mixture of anger and concern. "You think he'd go that far?" one of them asked. I looked him in the eye. "He already has." That night, driving home, I replayed the meeting in my head. The board members hadn't promised loyalty outright, but I saw doubt creeping into their views of Michael. That was something I could work with. Still, unease lingered. Michael wasn't the type to retreat. If anything, the pressure would push him to strike harder, and I couldn't predict how low he'd go next. When I pulled into my driveway, headlights flashed in my rearview mirror. A car slowed, then parked across the street. I waited, watching, but the driver never got out. After a few minutes, the engine roared again, and the car disappeared into the night. Coincidence? Or another message? I stood at my window long after, staring into the dark street, my heart pounding with equal parts fear and determination. If Michael wanted a war, then a war he would get. But this time, I wouldn't just defend, I'd strike back. The boardroom was colder than the church had been on the day of my father's funeral. The polished table gleamed under the harsh lights, and the long windows overlooked the city my father had worked his entire life to build. This was supposed to be Michael's moment, his final power grab. He sat at the head of the table, smug, his hands folded neatly as though he already owned everything. I walked in, calm, carrying only a folder. The lawyer followed closely behind. The directors whispered, their eyes darting between us, sensing a storm. Michael leaned back. "Rebecca, you don't belong here. You've been out of this business for years. Dad never trusted you with responsibility. This company is mine." I opened the folder and slid several documents across the table. "Really?" "Because these letters, signed by Dad and witnessed by 2 board members, say otherwise. He left instructions that I take over as interim chair until a permanent election is held." The lawyer cleared his throat and confirmed it. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Michael's breathing, suddenly louder, sharper. His face paled, but he tried to laugh it off. "Forged. She's desperate." That's when the lawyer pulled out the will. The real will. The one my father had signed only a month before his death. The same one Michael had tried to hide. "For the record," the lawyer said firmly, "this document was filed legally and supersedes all prior versions." As the pages were read aloud, Michael's world collapsed line by line. Not only had my father left me majority control of the estate, he had detailed every shady thing he suspected Michael might try. Assets were locked down, transfers blocked, safeguards put in place to prevent mismanagement. I sat quietly, letting every word settle like a gavel strike. The board shifted uncomfortably, realizing Michael had lied to them for weeks. Finally, Michael slammed his fist on the table. "This is ridiculous. I've run this company, not her. She doesn't deserve it." I looked at him, steady and unshaken. "Deserve?" "Michael, what I deserve isn't your approval. It's the truth. And Dad trusted me with it, not you." For the first time, I saw fear flicker across his eyes, not just fear of losing money or control.